I was hoping in a very non-specific, specific way, we could talk a little bit with both of you about numbers. And I guess it's more about, as composers, what should we be asking? What do we need to know? Because I think one of the hardest things is often, you might get an email through with some numbers and you're like, I think that's good. Possibly. It sounds like it's got a lot of zeros. That sounds fun. But it's never just the win fee, is it? So, Hollie, what questions would you expect a composer to ask, or what information would you give them when you're initially giving them the offer? Do you want to pitch for this ad?
Yeah, we would always lay out the demo fee, obviously the delivery time and date, and all of the brief, and then the win fee. Generally, actually, we don't say too much about the usage unless the composer asks, not really, just probably out of laziness, but sometimes we do. So yeah, the usage, we do generally say which territories it's going out in, and the duration. And yeah, I think that's it. We generally kind of do that overview, and that's mostly it, to be honest. We just kind of lay all of that out. Normally we also say within the demo fee how many rounds of revisions, and if we know any details about when it's kind of being decided and airing and all of that kind of stuff. A lot of the time we're so in the dark about these things ourselves. So yeah, we'll just lay out kind of all of the information in an email, usually, and go from there.
Yeah, great. That's really interesting to know that quite often you're in the dark as well, because I think as the people at the end of the process, we're often unsure as to whether to ask or to push, or so it's I think that relationship between composer and music supervisor, when it's really open, is just so great.
Definitely. And obviously we also do the terms, because sometimes brands will buy out the track, sometimes the music supervision agency will publish the track. It's always on a case-by-case basis on each job, so all of that should be there as well. If the supervisor hasn't said whether it's a license or a buyout or a split, then you should ask that question for sure. There's no harm in asking how many other people are pitching on things, or any other questions really, especially to do with the brief. Don't be scared to ask more questions. I have one composer that will phone me 4 times a day, and it's infuriating, but at the same time it wins, and he wins. And so, and I never ever, actually I say infuriating as a joke, ever get annoyed, because the more information that you can get, the better. There might be some snippet that we wouldn't have thought was useful in the brief, or that has just come to light, or just a bit of advice really on the brief. And yeah, so I always say, I send the brief and then say, let's get on the phone afterwards, usually, depending on how clear the brief is and the turnaround and stuff, because it's just really good to chat through the idea and the route and where you plan on taking it, and make sure that we're in aligned before you get started. So definitely as many creative questions, if you're not sure, are always welcome.
So don't be afraid to ask the silly questions either. I would imagine.
100%.
Anné, as a composer, one of the things that I'm so happy that you're doing this today is you're so fantastically open with all of this information. What should we be asking? What do you ask on your projects?
I ask, well, the most important things for me in terms of understanding what kind of where the fees should roughly be is the territories, because if it's a global campaign, it's a very different thing from airing in Luxembourg. The length of the license, I generally don't do many buyouts. I don't think I've actually ever done a buyout where it's an in perpetuity license, or it's like they own the track. I generally, personally, avoid doing those. I think if I'm working through a music production company or music supervisors, that's a slightly different thing from working through my own connections where, as Hollie was saying, you know, often the publishing, they want to take the publishing and then they obviously deal with that side of things. But this is just the way, you know, I generally work. So territory, length of license, the amount of edits is sometimes matters. You know, I've had things where there are a lot of cuts, and I've had things where there aren't. But I think, you know, if it's only a few, it doesn't tend to affect the numbers for me. And then obviously a media. So whether it's just a TV campaign, it's just for cinema, it's for everything. If it's, you know, only for internet, most of the time package deals, you know, like it can be. It's better for them to buy a package deal up front than, you know, buying one country at a time, and generally ends up costing them a lot more. So sometimes if you're negotiating fees or things, it might be, and you think they might want more than one territory, it might be worth offering them a package deal, which, for example, you know, has, I don't know, 3 countries, has the Nordic countries, because I do things for Finland, for example. And then giving them a slightly better deal. You know, sometimes you can kind of nudge them into actually buying more usage up front by you know, putting that to them. I've had that happen before. So yeah, and obviously, you know, because I was trying to think about the fees and how to kind of break them down. I think it can be, because it can be really difficult to try and figure out how to quote as a solo composer. And, you know, like most of the time, I don't actually have to do them a proper written quote. So a lot of the people that I work with, we just have a discussion and or they tell me, look, we've got this much. What can we make this work? And I feel like the budgets vary so drastically depending on the project. You know, what Hollie was talking about before. It's just like every project is different. And I think sometimes, you know, you have to decide for yourself whether it's worth for you to do the project, even though the fee is a bit lower than what it really should be. And you got to, you know, figure out whether it's the fact that it's a great campaign. It might open up doors of working with these people more. You know, that's your personal decision. Generally, I don't do demos for free, and I think composers shouldn't. They should try and avoid doing demos for free. I think that just brings down the situation for everyone. It's super rare that I would consider that. You know, it would have to be for, I don't know, there'd have to be some specific reason why I'd agree to do it. So I think always, you know, you should get a demo fee. And I think demo fees probably range from roughly about £200 to 1,500, which is a pretty nice demo fee if you get that. But, you know, it has happened. And then I think there's a for kind of guidelines. I don't know how many people have heard of PCAM. They're an organisation for people who write, you know, music for applied media, really, for picture. And they do their guidelines. They've got a lot of information on their website if you become a member, where you can use it as a starting point. Like you know, if you need to, for example, kind of have a bit of backing for your case of trying to justify figures to people or whatever, that's a good way to start. And they do a very kind of detailed breakdown in terms of what they recommend. So I've sometimes utilised their kind of territory breakdowns and things as a kind of starting point. But that's the thing; it's often just a starting point. So it's down to the negotiations. But you know, there's a lot of things you've got to consider. There's always a demo fee. There's a composition fee, which is for your work. I guess you probably, depending on your experience, and you know, that's a decision for you to make. I would probably say composition fee would be between 1,500 to 4,000 maybe. But then you would calculate your license fees based on your composition fee. So they'd be percentages, you know, depending on territories. So there are kind of ways of trying to make sense of it. you've got the demo fee, you've got the composition fee, you've got the license fees, which are separate. Then obviously you need to consider what your production costs are, whether you have to hire, singers, for example, who are expensive. I generally, because I do a lot of vocal stuff on some of my pitches, and I generally don't charge extra for that if I want to put vocals in, or if they're required, that might be already budgeted. But if I'm adding them in because I want to use them as a part of my pitch, I don't tend to kind of charge more for it, just because I can do it myself, and it might, it kind of puts me in a position where I can do that. And then there's kind of indirect costs, there's kind of admin, there's whatever little extras you can kind of calculate on top. So you need to kind of consider all of those things. But as Hollie mentioned, it's how long is a piece of string? So every project, you just gotta take on its merit and take on on what they're asking for. And it's difficult sometimes because you get asked for these really unusual things that they want to quote from one, I don't know, I think I got asked for 6 football games in like Germany in some random cities or something, and what I would charge for the commercial to be used there was a commercial that was already running on German TV. And so you're like, oh God, how am I going to charge? What should I charge for that? Because you don't want to kind of come up with some ridiculous number. And obviously, all the usage is beneficial, so you'd rather they go ahead with it than they don't. So it's a tricky one. But PCAM is worth looking at if someone is needing to quote for jobs a lot. They even if you just join I think you can join for 6 months even. And they've got, I think, lower joining fees for people who are earning less or who are just out of school. And it just gives you some way of starting to kind of get your head around the whole maze,
I definitely second that. They're incredibly useful and have very, very detailed like PDF breakdowns. So I think the link is in the chat if anyone wants to go and check them out.
Yeah.
But they are. It's a vague understanding. It's a starting point, isn't it?
Yeah. And obviously, it's super important to do your royalties after. Like, if you have something being broadcast, obviously, like if you're with a production company, then and who's doing the publishing, then some of that stuff is dealt with. But do not bother with that side of things, because that income can be really substantial if it's being broadcast and on decent channels and quite a lot. So it's not something to not register and make sure that you get that income in.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That was incredibly detailed. I really appreciate that. Thank you.